Well, good evening. Thank you all, and appreciate a good turnout and for the meet and greet with the Board of Education. My name is Byron Johns, and I chair the Education Committee for the NAACP. Want to also recognize we have the branch president, Linda Plummer. We have a number of the executive committee members. Raise your hand. Here we go. So thank you all for supporting this effort. And we have our guests. So let me just introduce real quickly. The Board of Education is the, and you read in your, hopefully all of you have an agenda. So you'll see in that agenda, it kind of gives you, if you're not familiar with the board's role is, it is the leadership and oversight group for the school system. It is a critical part of the decision in $2.59 billion per year spent on the operating budget alone. And not to forget, there's almost $2 billion capital budget? 1.8. We'll round it to 2. But a very significant capital budget that is also part of that. They are also responsible for the policies. So anything you like, they're the reason. Anything you don't like, they're the reason. So now's your chance to talk about those things. They have one employee, that is the superintendent of schools. And they approve and evaluate that. They help establish the goals for the organization. And for any of you parents that may have run into an issue that didn't get resolved and worked its way up, they are also the appeals board for a number of issues that may come to their attention if it gets to that point. So I should also point out that the 4 seats on the board are up for election this year, re-election. That is President Michael Durso, right? Mike, you want to just let him know. His seat will be up for re-election. We have Dr. Judy Daca. Where's Judy? There, right there. So Judy's going to be, is 2018 to be up for re-election, her seat. Mrs. Patricia O'Neill, Pat right here, will be up for re-election in 2018, and Mrs. Jill Ortman-Faust. There's Jill. So the 4 seats are up, so please engage these members. They play a very critical role in the education of our children, and they spend a lot of money in the county. So they're very critical decision makers. So with that, the way this is going to work is we have in small groups to give you a more intimate chance to have a conversation. With that, we'll run that about a half an hour for that discussion. There are a number of topics, and we have a facilitator and a scribe in each circle. Do we? We have facilitators, raise hands. We got that? 2, 3, 4. Here we go. Okay. So, and that'll just get to seed the conversation. We put a few topics for this first circle, first conversation, just to kind of get the conversation going. We gave you topics of, equity implementation. So you can peel that down as to what that looks like. If you look at the last page of this, is they talk about the values of the board and the values for the system. And equity is one of the core values. So we should talk about how that's realized and certainly dig into that. The district's top future challenges. This is a rapidly changing district. If you look, well, maybe rapid is relative, but if you look over the last 3-4 decades, it has changed quite significantly. So the board is certainly here to make sure that the district is positioned to be successful in the future going forward. So certainly those are interesting. Discipline disparity, I think all of you know that there is still, for African American students in particular, there's still a disparity in discipline, and so things that we're doing around that. Budget priorities, all of you hopefully have been paying attention, know that there is a bit of a disconnect. We started off asking for a 2.5 roughly % increase in the budget, and the county exec asked for a 2% reduction in the budget. So, that's obviously the board is wrestling with reconciling those priorities and those issues. And then overall, the catch-all phrase is, what are we doing? What are the goals for closing the achievement and opportunity gap that we still see for African-American students? So that'll be the first group conversation. We'll then take a break and allow people to, allow the board members to move, maybe to interact with another group of parents. And we'll talk about the other issues, boundary study, boundary policy reform, integrated versus segregated schools, countering implicit bias, data and transparency and accountability, and improving parent outreach and input and those things. After that, we will come together for a little readout of the large groups. I'll ask the scribes or the facilitator if you would kind of pick out the highlights from the meeting, the small group meeting, share that with the larger group, and then we will have a period for open Q&A for anything any of you have in your mind. You'll come take one of the mics, and we will, we'll pose that to any of the board members. Any and all will be able to answer that. We're going to have the first group, and your name?
My name is LaToya, and I'm from Ridgeville Parent Council Rep. The first topic we had was equity implementation. The major information that we received tonight was basically talking about the gifted and talented programs that Montgomery County has to offer in the locations they were in. The second topic was District Topics Future Challenge, and the biggest highlight that we talked about was that parents can't speak English, as well as more single parents may make it harder to be involved. About the parent involvement that we have at the school is kind of like low because of those particular reasons. Either they don't have the information, their language don't mix with everyone else's, they don't have a lot of schools don't have the translators to translate for the parents. The third one was disciplinary. Our main topic was how to communicate with the parents as they learn inside school, and the mediation, how mediation helps kids solve problems. We had a student to talk about mediation. And the last one was closing the gap. It was basically about parents getting involved will help the achievement gap close as involvement.
Okay. Thank you. Nope, that's it. Okay, we can have our next group. Just give a couple-minute highlight. And for those of you that didn't get a question, we're going to have a mic runner, an open Q&A with the board members after we do it, just a quick readout.
Hello, my name is Sam Coleman, Gaithersburg Middle School, NAACP rep. We had 3 sessions. We'll break them down 1, 2, 3. We had 13 people in our group with 2 board members, Dr. Judith Daka and Shebra Evans, and myself and Miss Myra Dudley-Bird compiled our notes because it was a lot of noise. So in our first session, we talked about equity implementation, and we discussed the emphasis on parental communications, and Dr. Daka talked about advertising on ride-on buses and making sure that parents were aware of certain magnet programs and immersion programs and when to apply, deadlines. We also discussed creating brochures that we could give to the parents so that they can have this information as well. Session 2, we talked about future challenge, such as support structure for accelerated programs, transportation for kids in those schools such as Lauderman, it was Pyle and another one. And we talked about providing transportation for them because if you're in those schools in the magnet program, you have to be taken there. There's no transportation for that. In addition to that, we talked about tutoring, and we also talked about having the teachers, giving the teachers support in these programs as well. Also in session 2, we talked about deportation, and we talked about Chief Sorka from Gaithersburg Police Department created a video And we, at Gaithersburg Middle School, we sent that out to all of our parents, letting them know that we were not sanctuary cities, but this is something that maybe Chief Manger can do on a countywide level, just to let all parents know, especially parents that may be here undocumented, that we are not a deport city, we are a sanctuary city, and that may increase more turnout for PTA meetings, just all the meetings that we have, as we know how hard that is to get people to come out. In addition to that, we push for accelerated learning and make sure that the training the teachers to be able to accommodate the students as well. And in some classes, as you know, they are pretty large. And we found out that for math and English, math is 28, English is 34 before you get a new classroom, but to accommodate the teachers and support them so that they can do their best to teach the students. In session 3, we talked about improving community outreach. Webinars were suggested, calling parents were suggested, and free conference calls were suggested. All of the 3 things that were suggested were advertised as free. Now, as the PTA president of Gaithersburg Middle School, I tried to spend every single penny on our student. So if this was to work for us, it would have to be free. Those were our 3 sessions. Thank you very much for your time.
Claudia. There we go. Thank you. Who was the session with Jeanette? Who was the scribe for? Pat. Okay, no, wait, got one more in front of you.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear this. These are me. By myself.
I'm Rachel Gibson, and I am the PTA rep for Belpre Elementary and Strathmore Elementary. And we talked about a lot. The positive things. So in terms of equity, I think our group would say that the equity plans are very data-driven to support our kids of color in the system. And so looking at access across schools, universal access to special programs, magnet programs, et cetera, having the same expectations for all our kids across the system, making sure that there's an expansion of cultural proficiency for teachers. We talked through, trying to actually put some money into achievement for after-school programs and ensuring that dual language programs were expanded across the city, across the county. So I think we saw all the wonderful positive things. We also had a really good conversation around future challenges and what we needed to do to further support our kids. And we had a great discussion about attracting and retaining teachers of color, because a child can start in kindergarten, graduate in high school, and never have a teacher of color to educate them for the entire time that they're in school. And so what are some public-private partnerships that can be forged to get more teachers into the system and to actually retain teachers into the system, particularly for our schools where our teachers are struggling more. And so we had this great conversation around what can us as parent reps do to continue to support those efforts. Is that it, pretty much? Yeah. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm Pat Price. I have a student at Wheaton High School, and our group was with Jeanette Dixon, and we talked about equity as it relates to finances for the school board. And we talked about how the budget's put together, receiving it from the superintendent, but that the board asks questions and gets input. Special mention of Nikki Diamond answering questions about the budget. We also talked about the achievement gap, and that we have a system that is almost 2 different systems within the same MCPS. Equity being a key to getting equity. And we also talked about the Richard Montgomery Cluster new school, the elementary school, and how there's a school left, Twin Brook, that has 70% farms, which is very different from the other schools. And what that will mean for those students and what it also will mean for the other students that are in those other elementary schools. And although they will all end up at Richard Montgomery High School, are they going to represent themselves equitably because of the schools that they're assigned to? Ms. Dixon also talked about visiting all the Title I schools. She's been to 14, there are 25. She talked about the challenges that teachers have in those schools and maybe some ways we can deal with those challenges in a different way. We discussed the idea of perhaps compensating people differently at Title I schools so you have a different level of teacher retention. We also talked about how the teachers have so much to do with not just educating and dealing with all the ills of society and being able to recognize. We also talked about linkages for learning, which is at many schools that are Title I, but not all. And Twin Brook is one of the schools that does not have a program. We also talked about the employee assistance program and how that's important for staff to have someone to talk to when they're having issues, because obviously when they're having issues, it's going to affect how they're working. We also talked about hiring a more diverse staff, and we questioned how long it's going to take and how this is going to be monitored. And we also briefly touched on gang issues in our county, and that it's important to obviously keep our students safe, and the continuing disparity in discipline. It has gotten better, but there's still room for improvement. Thank you.
Okay. Well, that was interesting, right? Isn't that pretty good? It's a great to get a chance to have some more interaction with the board members, because they do have a lot of responsibility. And again, we have a little over 1 million people in the county, 160,000 students who at least have one parent at home. So that's a lot of people who are looking for, on occasion, looking for guidance. So this was a real treat to be able to have some one-on-one time with these folks. So thank them again for that time and spending time with us. So now we have questions. Anybody, if you have an additional question that you didn't get to ask, that now's the time. We've got a runner. We do have a runner. We don't have a runner. Oh no, we had a runner. But I'll start it off while you think about your question. So what I'd like to ask each of the board members, if they could talk about any priorities that you are personally championing for within the schools, within your broader responsibility, but are there areas that you feel that you have a personal affinity for or willing to be a champion for in those within the school's purview? So Mike, you've been, and for those of you who don't know Mike has been in the system since Noah. Noah was a student of Mike's, actually.
Well, first of all, thanks to everybody for coming out. And I also wanted to add, Byron, I guess you're aware, the group I was in with Pat O'Neill, we had 2 students. And I don't want to embarrass you, but would you stand up? Because, ladies, you really did a nice job. Please stand.
Yeah.
One even ended up as the recorder. Now, I don't know if Mom volunteered her for that job or she did it on her own, but no, she did a good job. And it's always important, Mr. Post sitting next to me always reminds us at board meetings that when we hear from students, we really kind of hear the real unvarnished story and the truth. Difficult to put one priority over another. So let me just throw a couple out there for now, and as you hear from the other board members. Also, let the audience know that there are 7 of us here this evening, and the 8th member, Rebecca Smondrowski, could only stay for a short while at the beginning, but she had a family commitment, so please do not assume that her absence means that she's not interested in what we're doing. The parental involvement piece continually comes up, so let me just say something on that, and I'm sure other board members will have other topics. The traditional PTA involvement may not always work in all communities, and I'm not saying that to put down PTA or those who were involved with PTA, because it is very important. Over the years, and I was a principal for a long time in 3 different jurisdictions, it soon became apparent to me that a lot of parents were not officially involved by the traditional sense of the word for a lot of reasons. It may be time, it may be they're not necessarily being comfortable breaking into the inner circle. Some of you may have faced that in some schools. In some communities, there is a group that seems to kind of know what's going on and has the ear of the staff and faculty, and maybe others don't always know how or feel comfortable to break into that. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to get those parents out that maybe don't know how to maneuver or navigate the bureaucracy, or maybe just are unaware of those opportunities. But I don't think we should assume that just because some parents are not at the traditional events of fundraising or an international night or a Black History Month program, that those parents are not involved. They may be involved in different ways. But to get them more into the mainstream, and that sometimes involves some language adjustments too, I think that's incumbent on all of us, whether we be board members, community members, parent council representatives, to try to get a larger group out. Because when the community is involved, the school will stay on its toes. Thank you.
So yeah, a number of priorities that we are grappling with. It is hard to pick 1 or 2. I'll say I am very interested moving forward in making sure that our curriculum, particularly in English classes and early English classes, is reflective of the diversity of the county. It was not until 10th grade that I read a book in an English class by a non-white author, and I think that's sort of unacceptable, especially as we begin to think more deeply about cultural proficiency, not only on the part of our staff, but on our students. I'm also very concerned about our ESOL students. Our graduation rate for ESOL students is 2/3, 66%, which is concerning to me, and I think we ought to approach that issue, as with all of these opportunity gap issues, with a sense of urgency.
Okay, oh, it does work. Some of you know me. You know that I was a teacher and then an administrator. I was assistant principal at Blair and a principal at Argyle. And I also was coordinator for human relations. So I've been in the equity business for a very, very long time. And it is one of my concerns, always has been. Not that I'm not interested in the advanced programs, the challenging programs. I do appreciate those, but I want to see more of our children in these programs. And I think that we're looking at some ways to do that with universal testing in elementary school, and making sure that we get recommendations for our kids to be in these programs. We also talked about how to get this information out to parents who may not come to the PTA meetings, but who need to know this information. And I also want to say, read Jay Matthews' article today in the Post. He talked about visiting the homes of these students, that the staff should do that so they can better understand where the kids are coming from. And an important piece, and I think Mr. Durso touched on it, that it's not that these parents are not interested in education for their children, they are. We visited all the incoming 6th grade homes in Argyle in August, every sixth grade home. Parents were not able to be at home. They were taking public transportation. They only had one car. The kids were there by themselves. So it's really important to get out there and know what is happening. And also it gave them a face at the school so that they would feel more comfortable in coming into the school. I ran for the board, and this will be my fourth term to run, on the issue of equity. And so this is not a secret to anyone. I have tutored SATs. I've been the vice president of NAACP. I was in charge of programs. I was a youth sponsor for NAACP. So I've been at this a very long time. I understand how important it is for our kids, and especially African American kids. They are suspended 3 times as often as Asians and whites. And that suspension business is not good because it separates them from their classwork. So I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
So I too campaigned on equity. I have this maybe. So I too campaigned on equity and also was involved in an action group where our focus was on, early education, cultural proficiency, as well as just making certain that our policies didn't have unintended consequences for our students. But the one that I'm really passionate about is the early education. We've recently been able to fully fund our pre-K programs because of our county council giving us $2 million. One thing that can level the playing field for our students is being able to have that early education coming into school ready and prepared. And so that is really important. That can also help out our parents a lot. I live in the Wheaton cluster. Did a lot of advocating for our community. In our circle, we talked about, some of our parents working 2 and 3 jobs and not being able to come to our meetings because of the times that they're being held. And that early education could allow some parents to have additional resources because they're not having to spend that money paying for additional child care. So just really passionate about that, and we'll be celebrating the opportunities that we've been giving through because of our county council giving us that funding on Wednesday at Burt Mills Elementary School.
Hello, I'm Jill Ortman-Faust on the Board of Education. So I think that the biggest thing for me is making sure that our staff have high expectations for all of our kids in all of our classrooms and understand, get to know, and how to best support all of our kids in all of our classrooms. And I think that comes with training, with professional development, and with expectations. So, and it also comes with a diversified staff that better reflects the diversity of our kids. So I would love to see us grow our own because we are majority students of color in our district. So I think that we have the capacity to get more educators of color into our system. And it's how do we support them when they are here? How do we attract them? How do we retain them? And then for our teachers in our classroom, how do we make sure that they have the toolboxes they need to reach and support every child? And every child comes to school with different experiences and different impacts. One of the things I've been advocating for in addition to cultural proficiency training is trauma-informed practices because students who are coming from any kind of trauma, and poverty is a trauma, racism is a trauma, can be misunderstood in the classroom, and I think that that leads to the disproportionate impact of in our suspension rates. So when teachers don't understand why a kid is reacting the way they are, and the teacher's not assuming the best but assuming the worst, I think that leads to those outcomes. And whenever we take a kid out of the classroom, they're not learning. And we have one of our staff here who actually taught a session on elevating the black male, which was a fantastic course in our equity curriculum. And it was really interesting to hear, and I've shared this story many, many times, to hear the experiences of the educators and the teachers in that room and what they shared, and it's clear that we have a lot of work to do on that front. So, so that would be, I think, my greatest priority at this point.
Well, good evening, and thank you for having us. I think as I reflect on my time on the board, I'm now serving my 20th year on the board, and hopefully it'll be 4 more years, but, that's up to the voters. 75% of the taxpayers here in Montgomery County do not have children in the school system. And I think it's my job to help communicate to the greater community that this is our hope for democracy, building the future generations. And public education is doing a great job. But, we went through the recession years and we were rebased. Our funding was dramatically cut. And there is a whole long list of things I would do if I had unlimited resources. Along with Shebra, I happen to believe that pre-K is really important. I was a preschool teacher in my earlier life, and it helps to level the playing field for kids entering the system. And the studies of Head Start was that the results from high quality pre-K held through 3rd grade, but it's not the only thing we need to do. We also need to make sure that class sizes all the way along through the system give our teachers time enough so that everybody truly knows, like the Cheers song, everybody knows your name, so that they have the time to really tailor instruction to meet each and every student's needs. And certainly, we need more guidance counselors throughout the system at reasonable numbers so that our counselors really have the opportunity to know their students and have time. Kids come to school with a lot in their backpacks. There's a lot going on in this world. And then secretly, I desire for every child to have a foreign language experience in the elementaries. That's one of my passions. We live in a global society, and I think that younger children are like little sponges, and having that exposure also helps to create more of an understanding, a global awareness. So, I hope to see expansion even beyond the dual language. I really believe that every child needs that exposure. So, I guess my real wish is that I could spin straw into gold so that I could do everything that we need to do.
Can you all hear me? Yeah, I think it's mic'd up here. No pun intended, Mike. I'm Jeanette Dixon, and this is, just completed my first year on the Board of Education. Spent 30 years in Montgomery County as a teacher, parent, assistant principal, and principal at White Oak Middle School and Paint Branch High School. And so decided to run for the Board of Education. A part of it was hard to get used to being paid as a retiree for doing nothing, but I'm used to it now and enjoying my work on the board. So I think we are really, really very fortunate to live in Montgomery County. We have a budget that we're asking for of $2.59 billion. And that is a great concern to me, that we be good stewards of those funds, that the money be used to provide a world-class education, an equitable education for all of our students. And our superintendent talks about that. All means all. And as the board's one employee, I try to hold him to that. Other issues that I think are really important are working to ensure that our students, all of our students, and especially those who have not had some of the opportunities that are provided in Montgomery County, have those opportunities. And so that would be African American students, Hispanic students as well. And the process of deciding the boundaries for Richard Montgomery number 5, I learned a lot from that. And one of the things that I've become very passionate about are Title I schools, and actually have embarked on visiting all 25. And I've been to 14 so far, and I can tell you the principals and staff are doing yeoman's work there. And but they have a very heavy educational load in terms of, to be a Title I school, you have to have 68% farms. A lot are over 77%. And then also limited English proficiency, about 50%. Most of them have that in terms of students who get ESOL services. And so a lot of what happens in our society, what happens in our homes are brought into our schools. And so that makes it a challenge in terms of some mental health issues, issues related to sexual abuse, issues related to just, cultural pieces as well. But, and I'm talking predominantly here about, with some of our Hispanic communities, to really be able to engage parents. And I think that that is really, really important. What I is that let us hear from you often, because it does make a difference. Let the superintendent hear from you. I think that makes a difference as well. And we will continue to work on all of these issues as they relate to issues of restorative justice, discipline disparities. But we want to ensure that our schools, and this is my big piece, have everything that they need to deliver an outstanding instructional, extracurricular, and athletic program. I think Dr. Smith has done yeoman's work in getting the lay of the land in our system, and he has realigned some of the jobs, cut some of the jobs in the central office, returning some of those to the schools. I think that's been a positive thing. We need to continue to work to diversify our staff as well, and and help our staff understand, but not just understand, but appreciate and love all of our children. I think that that's really, really important. And so it's a lot that's on our plates, and we're working on that. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Okay, quick questions, couple of questions real quick. Pat, and then.
My name's Patricia Fenn. I'm from the Political Action Committee for the NAACP, and I wanted the board to know that the Education Committee is monitoring MC 118. It's a bill that will establish the Montgomery County Board of Education Salary Compensation Commission. It's been introduced by Delegate Eric Lutke, and he's waiting for that bill to be introduced in the House Education Subcommittee.
Thank you, Pat.
We've heard
Bill, I think that that's really very, very important because I think one of the things that we need to do is attract more people to run and be willing to serve on the board. Not that I need, more compensation, but I think that, having a wage, because this isn't a part-time job, although it's advertised as such. It is a full-time job. We get invited to everything. And I know we're going to be out most nights this week. But to have people who have children in the system and who can afford to provide for their family and also serve on the board, I think is really important. It's a little bit, maybe a little elitist, you know, we have retirees or folks who, you know, have a spouse who can support them, you know, in doing this work. It's really, really important work, and I think we need that you can do to get behind that bill. I think, you know, would make it possible for a variety of people to serve.
I meant to say that the reason why the bill is important is that it removes it from a state action. Anytime a local board of education wants to raise its salary, it requires a state law because it's a part of the state charter system. So by removing it from the state process, it allows, if and when a board of education's salary wants to be raised, it allows it to occur at a local level with local input.
Right. Currently, it's $25,000 a year. And so for me, that adds up to like $704.67 every 2 weeks. But we also get the health insurance as well, but I don't take that because I have that as a retiree.
Our legislative aide has some comments she wants to add to the bill.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
A couple of quick points for those that are following. Education subcommittee is going to be talking. Is it more? The Education Subcommittee is going to be talking about it this Friday afternoon, and then the bill will have a hearing in Ways and Means on February 1st. To provide a little bit of clarification, it would still be up to state law to change salaries. All this bill does is it requires the commission to report its findings to the Montgomery County delegation. The delegation is then charged, can potentially act on it and change state law to raise the salaries and or leave them the same, but it would still have to be state legislation. All this does is just require the conversation to happen every 4 years and to make recommendations to the delegation rather than having it only happen when the Board of Education thinks to bring it up or a delegation member thinks to bring it up. So it still requires state changes moving forward.
I'm Joe St. George. I'm the Legal Redress Chair for the NAACP, and I have a question with regards to school discipline, specifically with regards to discretion. The school discipline policies leave a lot of discretion for the teachers and the principals to apply the disciplinary rules in ways that that result in these desperate outcomes. And my question is can there be a change so that, number one, the principal, whoever makes the final determination on discipline, they look at the discipline of other students within the database. You guys have a database, you're taken amongst each student and evaluate them against other students. If this student was treated one way or disciplined for 3 days, then this for the same action. That's number one. Has there been discussion about that? And if not, I'm making that recommendation. But then number two, with regards to having more direction on the disciplinary outcomes when it comes to the investigation process. As a lawyer, I see that I noticed, at least in one matter that I was involved in, due process was not really followed. Was not followed. And kids can be, allegations can be made without there being corroborating information by other teachers or other students. The investigation process is just not what I would consider. I was wondering if there's any way that the school board could involve a legal team to give more detail, find the things that need to be done by teachers and or principals in gathering the information to assess, you know, what the discipline should be, because, you know, I know the law grants tons of discretion to the board. Basically, the courts have said whatever you guys say goes, and that essentially I think allows for desperate treatment of black and brown kids in the school system. So so that's the first issue. But then the second issue is, have you looked at the diversity of your outside counsel that you rely on for administrative hearings? I've looked at least one of the law firms. It's not diverse. So, and when I say diverse, the lawyers themselves are not people of color. And one, an African American woman trying to support a student, and I just didn't like how he responded and operated as a lawyer. And so I really think that you need to consider diversity also with your suppliers, with the lawyers, the law firms that represent the department, because their guidance is important in the decision-making process if you have administrative hearings with parents. And if they're not diverse and don't have an understanding of the different issues that impact children of color, then they're not able to give you the best direction on how you can handle cases, because and of course they're going to do all that they do as lawyers to continue the gravy train for the things that I would like to know is what can be done to have more guidance or rules that are set when it comes to discipline, and not so much discretion, more of a, you know, 3 strikes kind of rule, not 3 strikes against the kids, but just more specifics, so there's not these disparities when it comes to how kids are disciplined, and then requiring them to compare how they're disciplining other kids for the same situations, you know, that are of different ethnic groups.
Thank you, counsel.
Let me start with the latter part of the makeup of outside counsel. A few years ago, we made the decision to try to bring more of our legal situations in-house, with the idea that eventually, if not all of our cases will be handled in-house, certainly the majority of them, and we're moving towards that. The Maryland State Board some years ago mandated that all jurisdictions would develop a code of conduct, which we have also done. We'd actually been working on that ahead of time. And that gives a broad framework in terms of the various infractions and how it can be handled. I would say to you, as a former principal in this school system and in 2 other jurisdictions, Washington, D.C. and Arlington, Virginia, I don't know that I would want to remove that discretion from the local school. Every case is different, and even though it may appear to be similar, it really is not. And those decisions at the local level are reviewed at the central office by the director for that cluster and by the associate superintendent as we look at the suspension and disciplinary statistics under the larger umbrella of disparity.
I would just add as well, I think a lot of the times the disparities that happen in the actual discipline is the result of implicit bias and students not knowing their rights. And as students, we do not do as good of a job of distributing the code of conduct to all students with consistency. Something that I've been working on with Dr. Jonathan Bryce is distributing a 1-page code of conduct to all secondary students starting next year. It doesn't address the root of the problem, but I think it's one way we go about reducing it.
Great, thank you. Last question.
Good evening, everyone. My Lowerfields and my wife is Leslie. We are parent reps for Darnstone Elementary School and Lakeland Middle School. And as I came in late, sorry, and I was listening to the keywords. I've heard diversity. I've heard African American males in the school systems. And one thing I noticed at the two schools that I just mentioned is there's no diversities for educators in those two schools. Obviously, I have kids that go to the schools. Maybe you don't know that. And I have some kids now that would come home and express how they feel and how they're being treated with some educators at those particular schools. I guess what my question is, I know the process of bringing in different minority educators into schools would take time, and I don't know what the time frame is to start populating those type of educators. My question is, with the current educators, is there any training process that you guys would have for any teacher of any complexion to be able to see those issues that you guys brought up? Because I know one thing that one particular issue I'm dealing with now is I have a 7-year-old that's basically is just being said has some issues with.
Get another mic.
And
We'll give it. Or yours doesn't work either.
Can you? Because I don't know if the teachers. The training that I presume might help them recognize the issues instead of labeling the kid as being a behavior problem. Is there something in the system that they have that? And my wife to mention that we are parents of 11 kids, and we have kids that are from preschool to all the way to college level, all the way up. So we see it through the process, and even the ones that left those particular schools would come back and tell us, yes, I felt this kind of way, and we talk about it. So.
I'd like to make a comment. I'm concerned about the suspensions, and okay, it starts in the classroom. My feeling, we do not do enough training that you're talking about. We need to do a lot more, because by the time the teacher and the student get into whatever it is, the student is so angry that the teacher ends up sending the child to the office, and then the office has to deal with it. So my contention is that we really need to do much more with the student in the classroom, because that's the first level of defense for our students, or that's where they get treated by the teachers. And I agree with you that sometimes they're not treated the way they should be, and expectations are not where they should be for our students.
Yeah, absolutely, and it goes this way. So I'm on the disproportionate minority contact reduction group for the county that looks at the school to prison pipeline. I've been doing that for the last couple of years, and how students are treated. This is what I was talking about, like we talked about in the Elevating the Black Male course, how behavior is interpreted differently, and also kids. And when I was talking about the trauma-informed teaching practices, is they have this fight, flight, or freeze reflex when they're challenged. And if a student is understood and the teacher's making the good assumptions about the child, it's going to be a very different scenario than if the teacher's making other assumptions about a child based on not their understanding of what a child needs. And our kids are that's why I was talking about the toolbox, is when you see behavior, what are the next steps? And is it calling out a child in front of all of their peers, humiliating them, and then the child becomes in a one-upsmanship game? Or is it going to the child, kneeling down, it seems like you're having a hard time today. What's going on? How can I help you? If a child comes into the late, or do you say, why are you late to my classroom? What's going on? Go to the office. So I think that those are the kinds of competencies that we need to develop in our teachers so that they can better be able to relate. Because all of our classrooms should be sanctuaries for a child, where the child is loved and understood and welcomed and supported. Well, I just had this conversation with Dr. Kim Statham, who's head of our Office of School Support and Improvement, and talking about the equity work that we're doing and the reorganization and the equity work, and specifically moving the equity people under the Office of School Support and Improvement so that the principals can be held accountable for that work more directly.
And if I may, I just wanted to add my experience. Both of my children have graduated college and are gone. But my son in the second grade was labeled, and the teacher decided to tell me that I needed to put my son on Ritalin. At that time, I had no idea what Ritalin was. And what did I do? The school system has, I think, their responsibility to address those situations. As a parent coming from a foreign country where the only time my mom and dad had to go to the school was when I was in trouble, this was new. I told my husband, I know my son doesn't need medicine. He was walking at the age of 7 months, kicking a soccer ball at 9 months. He's an active boy. So you will go to that classroom and you will be there during the day while I'm at work because you work at night. And he did, for one entire week. And he came back and said, oh, my son, he's one of the best behaved boys. I said, well, no, we'll not go there. But I'm just sharing this to share what role we as parents can play. Even if you can't be there, maybe a grandmother or an aunt or somebody in the neighborhood who has the time to go and sit in that classroom because we can, and just observe and report. It goes a long way. And my son wasn't put on Ritalin. And I fight that fight for any parent in the school system. So. Okay. And I think the school system's gone a long way, has come a long way in addressing these situations. And I'm not holding brief for the school system, but I've been in it for a very long time. There have been some positive changes. There's still more work to be done, but there's a piece that the board has a role in, central office, and the parents and the community. That's why we have the NAACP Parents Council. That's why we have parents who are coming and will go back to that school and say, I can do this. I can sit in this class and observe and share, and I try to find out what it is we can do for my son to be successful without being labeled and given medication.
Back to the other point, it's like, you can't train bias away because everybody makes assumptions. I mean, that's how we categorize the world around us, but it's recognizing that you are making assumptions, and why are you making those assumptions, and being aware of those assumptions that you're making and questioning those assumptions. And after our cultural proficiency training, which we can always use more of, but this is the first year that we had mandatory cultural proficiencies training for all staff, what the staff came back that told me at different schools was, it may not have been everything that they needed, but it was a start, and it started the conversations. So it brought up in the when they were talking in the cafeteria or in the teacher's lounge, or just the conversations with instruction, they would start holding each other accountable and having those deeper conversations about what was happening in practices in their schools.
I'm sorry, we're in the interest of just honoring. We've asked people to go over, and what I do want to do is just, first, can we thank the board, if you can take a minute just to thank them. And all of the parents that stayed, the scribes and the facilitators, thank you. And our media tech that's somewhere in the building for this. We will have elements of this once we get it edited down that will be available on the website if you need to share with some other folks going forward. But again, it's very valuable to have these dialogues. I think this was an opportunity, a unique opportunity to really have some one-on-one time. So hopefully this was of value. You found it of value, most importantly. So thank you, and certainly if there's any follow-on conversation before we have to get out of here, you can grab a member and speak.